If you've never been inside a climate-controlled storage facility at 3 in the morning, you don't know what true silence sounds like. It's not peaceful, it's heavy. It's the kind of silence that hums in your ears, amplified by the low, constant drone of the industrial HVAC system that keeps the whole building at a sterile, shivering 60 degrees. I took the job at Ironclad Storage because I was desperate. My tuition was due, my rent was late, and my bank account was sitting at a pitiful $14. The ad on Craigslist was vague. Night security, no experience needed, immediate start, cash pay. But I didn't care. I needed money, and I needed it yesterday. The interview, if you could call it that, lasted 10 minutes. The manager, a sweaty, thick-necked guy named Miller, didn't even ask for a resume. He just looked at my size, I'm 6'2" and broad-shouldered, and nodded. "You scare easy, kid?" Miller had asked, chewing on a toothpick. "No," I lied. "Good. The place makes noises. Pipes settling, metal expanding. Don't call the cops unless you see blood or fire. Otherwise, stay in the booth, do your rounds at midnight and 3 a.m., and keep the doors locked." The previous guy, Mike, he was a bit flighty. Left in the middle of a shift last week, left his lunch and everything. Miller slid a heavy ring of keys across the metal desk. "Welcome to Ironclad." That was it. No training, no background check, just a set of keys and a uniform shirt that smelled faintly of stale cigarettes. My first shift started at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. The facility was a fortress of brutalist concrete, 5 stories tall, sitting in the middle of an industrial park that went dead after sunset. The lobby was a small glass box attached to the front of the building, filled with monitors showing grainy black and white feeds of the endless corridors inside. For the first 2 hours, it was boring, excruciatingly boring. I sat in the ergonomic chair, scrolling through my phone, occasionally glancing at the 16 monitors. The screens showed nothing but rows and rows of identical orange corrugated metal doors. Floor 1, Floor 2, Floor 3. It was mesmerizing in the worst way. At midnight, I grabbed the heavy Maglite flashlight Miller had left and started my first patrol. The transition from the office to the facility proper was jarring. I keyed a heavy fire door and the air pressure changed instantly. The smell hit me first. Dust, dry cardboard, and old concrete. The hallway stretched out in front of me, seemingly endless. Ironclad was designed with motion sensor lighting to save electricity. The hallway was pitch black until I took a step. Click buzz. The fluorescent tube above my head flickered to life. I took another few steps. Click buzz. The next light turned on, while the one behind me timed out and clicked off. It created this tunnel vision effect. I was walking in a bubble of light, surrounded by darkness on both sides. I cleared the first floor easily, just row after row of locked units. Some had heavy padlocks, some had cheap combination locks, but all were secured. I took the freight elevator to the second floor, then the third. It was on the fourth floor that things felt off. As the elevator door slid open with a metallic groan, I stepped out into the blackness. Click buzz. The light above me turned on. But down the hall, about 50 feet away, another light flickered on. I froze. The sensors were supposed to be local. They only triggered if something moved directly under them. I stared at the patch of light down the hall. It stayed on for 10 seconds, illuminating a section of units, 401 through 405, and then clicked off, plunging the corridor back into darkness. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed, bouncing off the metal doors, sounding thin and weak. Nothing. "Probably a rat," I muttered to myself, tightening my grip on the flashlight. I walked forward, forcing myself to be rational. Miller said the place settled. Maybe the wiring was faulty. I walked the length of the fourth floor, checking the locks. Clank, clank, clank. I pulled on them mechanically. I reached the end of the hallway, turned the corner to head back towards the elevator, and stopped dead. Halfway down the hall I had just walked through, the hall that was empty 10 seconds ago, a unit door was rolled up. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was Unit 412. I was certain I had just checked it. I remembered the lock. It was a distinctive, shiny red master lock. I had pulled on it. It had been sealed tight. Now the red lock was lying on the concrete floor. The shank had been cut clean through, the metal gleaming where the bolt cutters had bitten into it. The corrugated metal door was shoved up about 2 feet, creating a dark, gaping mouth at the bottom of the unit. I stood there, 50 feet away, the silence roaring in my ears. The logical part of my brain screamed at me to run, to go back to the elevator and call the police, but the adrenaline made me stupid. I wanted to know if someone was inside. "Security!" I yelled, trying to sound authoritative. "Come out! Police are on the way!" Silence. I raised the flashlight, aiming the beam at the gap under the door. The light cut through the gloom, illuminating the concrete floor inside the unit. It was empty. No boxes, no furniture. But in the center of the dusty floor, illuminated by my trembling beam, was a sleeping bag. It was unrolled, messy, as if someone had just scrambled out of it. And next to the sleeping bag sat a plastic 7-Eleven cup. I took a step closer, squinting. Condensation was still dripping down the side of the cup. A small pool of water had formed at the base. The ice hadn't melted yet. Someone wasn't just living here. They were here right now. I turned to run back to the elevator, my boots squeaking on the polished concrete. I jammed the button, praying for the doors to open. Click buzz. A light turned on at the far end of the hallway. Click buzz. The next light closer to me turned on. Click buzz. They were coming towards me, fast, and I couldn't see anyone in the corridor. I slammed my fist against the door close button, mashing it so hard I thought the plastic would crack. Click. Buzz. The light directly in front of the elevator doors flickered on. The pool of illumination spilled over the threshold, lighting up the scuffed yellow safety light on the floor. I held my breath, pressing my back against the rear wall of the elevator cabin, waiting for a face to appear in that square of light, waiting for a hand to shoot out and stop the doors. For a split second, I thought I saw a shadow, long and distorted, stretch across the concrete floor just outside. Then, with a groan of rusted cables, the heavy metal doors slid shut, sealing me inside. I didn't exhale until the elevator jolted and began its slow descent. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stared at the floor indicator as it lit up. 3, 2, 1. When the doors opened on the ground floor, I didn't walk, I sprinted. I burst through the fire door into the lobby, bolted for the security office, and threw the deadbolt on the glass door. I backed away, chest heaving, my eyes scanning the dark parking lot outside. It was empty. Just the lonely street lamps casting orange circles on the asphalt. "Okay," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Okay, Elias. Breathe." I spun around and collapsed into the desk chair, grabbing the mouse. The monitor bank was a wall of gray light. My eyes darted to the screen labeled Cam 4, Corridor B. That was the hallway I had just fled. The feed was grainy, black and white, and refreshed with a slight lag. On the screen, the hallway looked empty. The lights had all timed out, leaving the corridor in darkness again. I clicked the playback software. My hands were trembling so badly I had to use 2 hands to steady the mouse. I rewound the footage by 2 minutes. Play. I watched myself on the screen, a small, pixelated figure walking down the hall. I saw myself stop. I saw me shine the flashlight into Unit 412. I watched my posture stiffen. Then I saw myself turn and run. And that's when I saw it. In the live moment, down in the hallway, I had been looking at the lights triggering toward me, but on the wide-angle security camera, I could see the whole corridor at once. As I ran toward the elevator on the screen, the door to the unit next to 412, Unit 414, slid up. It was smooth and fast. A figure slipped out. They were wearing dark clothes, a hoodie pulled up tight. They didn't run. They moved with a terrifying, fluid silence, hugging the wall, staying perfectly in the blind spot of the light sensors I had just triggered. While I was staring at the lights coming toward me, thinking I was being chased from the front, this person had been flanking me. They stopped just outside the elevator range as the doors closed on the video feed. I watched the figure on the screen stand there for a moment, staring at the closed elevator doors. Then, they slowly turned their head and looked directly up at the camera lens. The face was a blur of low-resolution pixels, obscured by the hood and a dark medical mask, but the eyes, 2 dark pits, seemed to bore right through the monitor. The figure raised a hand and pointed. Not at the camera. They pointed down. Then the screen went black. No, no, I hissed, clicking the mouse frantically. Video signal lost. I checked the other cameras. Floors 1, 2, 3, and 5 were fine, but floor 4, all 4 cameras covering the hallways, were dead, static. I grabbed the office phone. I didn't care about Miller's instructions anymore. I was calling the cops. I lifted the receiver and dialed 911. There was no dial tone, just a soft, rhythmic clicking sound. Click, click, click. I slammed the phone down and patted my pockets for my cell phone. I pulled it out. No service. Come on, I groaned. The building was basically a concrete bunker. Cell service was spotty inside the office, but usually if I stood by the window. I moved to the glass wall of the office that faced the parking lot. I held my phone up, watching the bars. 1 bar. 2 bars. Bang! A heavy thud came from the ceiling directly above my head. I flinched, dropping my phone. It clattered on the thin carpet. The sound came again. Thump. Drag. Thump. It was the sound of someone crawling through the ventilation ducts. I looked up at the drop ceiling tiles. They were standard office tiles, lightweight, made of compressed fiber, flimsy. The sound was moving from the back of the office towards the center, right above the desk. I scrambled back, grabbing the heavy mag light from the desk as a weapon. "I know you're there," I shouted, my voice cracking. "I'm armed." The noise stopped instantly. Silence settled over the office, heavier than before. I stood there, flashlight raised like a baseball bat, waiting for a tile to pop out, waiting for a pair of legs to drop down. Instead, my eyes drifted to the desk. In my panic, I had knocked over a stack of papers near the keyboard. Underneath the invoices and the schedule, there was a small, spiral-bound notebook. It looked old, the cover torn. Written on the front in black Sharpie was, "The shift log, do not remove." I kept one eye on the ceiling and reached out with my left hand to flip the notebook open. The first few pages were standard stuff, Miller's handwriting about deliveries, gate codes, filter changes. Then the handwriting changed. It became jagged, hurried. This must have been Mike, the guy before me. October 4th. Found a wrapper in the hallway on 3. Nobody has accessed 3 in a month. October 12th. The sensors are broken. They keep lighting up like a Christmas tree on 4 and 5. Miller won't fix them. October 15th. I heard them talking tonight, in the vents. I froze. I looked up at the ceiling again. Nothing but white tiles. I looked back at the logbook. The entries skipped a few days, the writing getting worse, pressing so hard the pen had torn through the paper. October 24th. The last entry. They're not squatters. Squatters leave messes. Squatters try to hide. These guys are moving things. I saw them on the cam. They're moving crates from the basement up to 5. What is in the basement? We don't have a basement. My blood ran cold. I flipped the page. There was one last thing written, not in Mike's handwriting, but in a precise, blocky print. It was fresh ink. "He sees you, Elias." I dropped the book as if it were burning. Suddenly, the monitor bank flickered. All 16 screens went black for a second. When they came back on, every single camera, all 5 floors, the exterior, the gate, was showing the same image. It was a live feed of the inside of the security office. It was a camera angle from high up, looking down. I saw the top of my own head. I saw me holding the flashlight. I saw the logbook on the floor. The camera was hidden inside the smoke detector directly above me. And as I stared at the screen, paralyzed by the realization that I was being watched from inches away, the office landline rang. Ring, ring. The phone rang again. Ring. It was a physical jolt, like an electric shock running up my spine. I stared at the plastic receiver, my hand hovering over it. The logical part of my brain, the part that was rapidly shrinking, told me not to answer. It told me that nothing good could come from that connection. But the human instinct to know, to understand the threat is a powerful, stupid thing. I picked it up. I didn't say anything. I just pressed the plastic against my ear and listened. At first, there was just the hiss of static. Then, a voice. It wasn't the synthesized robotic voice from the smart home movies. It was a man's voice. It was calm, low, and terrifyingly clear. "You have a bad habit of looking where you shouldn't, Elias." My throat was so dry I could barely speak. "Who is this?" Mike didn't listen either, the voice continued, ignoring my question. He thought the job was just sitting in the chair, but the job is about discretion. It's about looking at the screens and seeing only what you're paid to see. "I'm calling the cops," I managed to choke out, though I knew the threat was empty. The voice chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound. "You already tried. The lines are rerouted locally. You're talking to the storage room, Elias. You're talking to us." "Let me out," I said, gripping the desk so hard my knuckles turned white. "I don't care about your storage units. I don't care about the logbook. Just open the front door and I'll walk away. I won't say a word." There was a pause. A long, heavy silence stretched over the line. "The shift ends at 6 a.m., the voice said, devoid of emotion. "If you're still at the desk then, you get paid. If you try to leave before then, well, that's a violation of contract." Click. The line went dead. I slammed the receiver down, the plastic cracking against the base unit. "Screw this," I hissed. I wasn't going to wait to be hunted. I grabbed the maglite and the heavy ring of keys Miller had given me. I needed to get out. I ran to the glass door of the security office. It was a simple, heavy-duty glass door with a thumb-turn lock on the inside. I twisted the lock and shoved. It didn't budge. I frowned, shoving harder. It felt like it was welded shut. I looked down at the mechanism. A thick, steel magnetic bolt had dropped from the frame into the top of the door, an electromagnetic lock. I looked at the keypad on the wall next to it. The lights on the pad were dead. "He cut the power to the exits," I whispered. I turned and ran to the front entrance of the lobby, the glass double doors that led to the parking lot. I threw my shoulder against them. Locked. I kicked the glass, but it was reinforced safety glass, wire meshed but impact resistant. It didn't even vibrate. I was trapped in a glass box. I backed up into the center of the lobby, spinning around looking for a weakness. The security office was effectively a fishbowl. If I stayed in there, I was a sitting duck. The lobby was just as bad, exposed, lit up by the streetlights outside. Then I remembered the layout. The facility was a square. The front was the office and lobby. The back was the loading dock. By law, there had to be emergency fire exits at the rear of the building, mechanical push-bar doors. They couldn't be locked electronically. It was a fire code violation. But to get to them, I had to go back inside. I had to go back through the fire door into the main warehouse and cross the entire ground floor to reach the rear exit. I looked at the heavy steel door that separated the lobby from the storage units. It was the only way forward. I jammed the master key into the lock. It turned with a stiff grind. I took a deep breath, raised the flashlight, and pushed the door open. The smell of dust and concrete washed over me again, stronger this time. The ground floor hallway stretched out into infinite darkness. Click, buzz. The motion light above my head turned on. I stepped through, letting the door close behind me. It latched with a final echoing thud. I was back in the belly of the beast. My plan was simple: sprint, just run straight down the main corridor, turn left at the freight elevator, and hit the rear exit. 2 minutes tops. I started to jog, my boots thudding softly on the concrete. Click, buzz, click, buzz. The lights timed perfectly with my movement, creating that tunnel effect again. I was halfway down the main hall when a sound stopped me dead in my tracks. Ding! It was the elevator chime. I skidded to a halt at the flashlight beam dancing wildly. The freight elevator was located at the intersection ahead of me, about 50 feet away. The digital display above the doors was glowing red in the darkness. It had been on floor 4 when I left it. Now the numbers were counting down. 3, 2. Someone was coming down, and they were coming down specifically to the ground floor to cut me off. I looked around frantically. I couldn't go back to the lobby. I'd be trapped against the glass. I couldn't go forward towards the elevator. My eyes landed on a unit to my right. Unit 104. It was a large unit, 10 by 20, and unlike the others, the padlock on the latch wasn't fully closed shut. The shackle was resting in the hole, but it wasn't clicked shut. I made a split-second decision. I grabbed the padlock, yanked it off, and threw up the rolling metal door. It shrieked, screech, metal on metal, a sound that surely woke the dead. I winced, diving inside the unit and pulling the door down as fast as I could. I didn't close it all the way. I left a 2-inch gap at the bottom so I could see out. I killed my flashlight immediately. I was plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. The air in the unit smelled rancid like wet cardboard and something coppery like old pennies. I lay on my stomach on the cold concrete, pressing my face to the gap at the bottom of the door. I watched the hallway floor, illuminated by the motion sensor light that was still on because of my movement. I waited. Ding! The elevator arrived. The heavy doors groaned open. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I saw them. Boots, heavy black combat boots, stepped out of the elevator. Then another pair. Then a third. 3 pairs of boots. They didn't walk like security guards. They walked with purpose. They stopped in the middle of the intersection. I couldn't hear voices, just the rustle of heavy fabric. Then one of the pairs of boots turned. They began walking down the hallway, towards my unit. They weren't checking random doors. They were walking straight towards where the motion light had been triggered. The boots stopped right in front of my gap. I held my breath, my lungs burning, my heart hammering against the floor. I was sure they could feel the vibration. A hand reached down, a gloved hand. He was holding something metal. He was a set of bolt cutters. The hand placed the tip of the bolt cutters on the concrete, resting them like a cane. Then the boots shifted. The person crouched down. I squeezed my eyes shut, terrified that if I looked, I would lock eyes with the gap. "Come out, Elias," the voice whispered. It wasn't coming from a speaker this time. It was right on the other side of the thin sheet of metal. "We have a lot of work to do in the basement." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted iron. I lay there, frozen, my cheek pressed against the rough, freezing concrete, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years that the man wouldn't lift the door. "He's not here," the voice said, sounding bored now. The boots shifted. The heavy fabric of his pants rustled as he stood up. "The sensor on the loading bay door just tripped. He's trying for the back exit." Another voice, deeper and rougher, echoed from the elevator area. "You sure? The light here is still on." "He's fast," the first man replied. "Let's flush him out. Take the left corridor. I'll take the right." The boots turned away from my door. I listened to the heavy, rhythmic thud of their footsteps receding down the hallway. Thud, thud, thud. Then the hallway plunged into darkness. The motion sensors had timed out. I didn't move for a full 2 minutes. I lay in the pitch black, listening to the distant sounds of doors being kicked and metal clanging against metal as they swept the far end of the facility. They were hunting, and they were thorough. The silence inside Unit 104 was heavy, but the smell was heavier. Now that the adrenaline spike was leveling off just slightly, the scent I had noticed earlier became suffocating. It wasn't just old pennies, it was rot. It was the sweet, cloying stench of meat that had been left out in the sun, masked poorly by bleach and industrial chemical solvents. I needed to see. I knew it was a risk, but I couldn't stay in this metal coffin without knowing what I was lying next to. I rolled onto my back, pulling the mag light tight against my chest. I covered the lens with my hand, leaving only the tiniest sliver of space between my fingers, and clicked it on. A thin beam of light, no wider than a pencil, cut through the dark. I swept the light across the ceiling first. Corrugated metal. Clean. Then down the walls. My breath hitched. The walls of Unit 104 weren't metal. They were lined with heavy, translucent plastic sheeting, taped at the seams with thick black duct tape. It looked like a kill room from a bad movie, but the craftsmanship was too precise, too practiced. I moved the light down to the floor. The center of the unit was dominated by a large stainless steel table, the kind you'd see in a restaurant kitchen or a morgue. It was bolted to the concrete. On top of it sat a row of tools arranged with obsessive neatness: bone saws, heavy-duty shears, rolls of wire, and a stack of clear plastic tubs. But it was what was under the table that made my stomach lurch violently. There was a pile of clothes. It wasn't random laundry. It was a pile of uniforms. I shifted the light, my hand shaking so bad the beam danced like a strobe. I saw a gray shirt with a patch that read Ironclad Security. It was torn at the shoulder, dark stains stiffening the fabric. Next to it was a blue windbreaker like a delivery driver would wear. A pair of high-vis strips. I crawled closer, fighting the urge to vomit. I needed to know. I reached out and grabbed the gray shirt. It was stiff, crusty. I turned it over to look for a name tag. There wasn't one. It had been cut off. But underneath the pile of clothes was a cardboard box. I nudged it open with the flashlight. Wallets. Dozens of them. I reached in and pulled one out at random, a brown leather bifold. I flipped it open. The driver's license belonged to Michael Henderson. Mike, the guy Miller said had walked off the job last week. I dropped the wallet and grabbed another. Sarah Jenkins, age 22. David Ross, age 45. My God, this wasn't just a murder room. This was a trophy case. Ironclad Storage wasn't storing furniture. It was a processing center. They were using the anonymity of the facility, the endless rows of locked metal doors to hide everything. Basement, I whispered, remembering the logbook. We have work to do in the basement. There was no basement on the blueprints. I had seen the fire escape maps in the lobby. The building was slab on grade. But looking at the floor near the back of the unit, I saw something that shouldn't be there. The concrete floor had been cut. A perfect square about 3 feet wide, outlined in fresh silicone sealant. A trapdoor. Suddenly, a sound cut through the silence. Bzzz! It came from the walkie-talkie clipped to the belt of Mike's bloodied uniform pants that were tangled in the pile under the table. I stared at the device. The green light on top flickered. Clear on the loading dock, the deep voice crackled, distorted by the static. Then he's still in the main hall, the first voice replied. Check the units, every single one. Start at 101 and work your way down. Break the locks if you have to. I scrambled backward, hitting the steel leg of the table. Clang. The sound was soft, but in the silence of the storage facility, it might as well have been a gunshot. Did you hear that? The voice on the radio asked. Unit 104, the first voice said. I'm right outside it. I killed the light. I heard the sound of the bolt cutters scraping against the concrete outside, then the heavy, grating noise of the metal door being lifted. The sound of the corrugated metal door rolling up was deafening, a shriek of rusted steel that seemed to vibrate inside my skull. Light from the hallway, a stark fluorescent yellow, spilled across the concrete floor of the unit, eating away the shadows where I was crouched. I didn't think. Thinking would have gotten me killed. I reacted on pure animal instinct. As the door cleared waist height, revealing a pair of thick legs clad in black tactical pants, I gripped the heavy maglite in my right hand like a club. In my left, I grabbed one of the plastic tubs from the table. I didn't know what was in it, and I didn't care. The man stooped to enter, his silhouette filling the opening. He was huge, blocking the light, a faceless golem in a dark hoodie. Found you! I launched the plastic tub at his head. It struck him square in the chest, exploding open. A thick, viscous liquid, formaldehyde maybe, or bleach, splashed over him. He grunted, stumbling back a step, raising his arms to shield his face. I lunged. I drove my shoulder into his midsection with every ounce of adrenaline-fueled strength I possessed. It was like hitting a brick wall, but his balance was already compromised. We both went down hard onto the hallway concrete. I landed on top of him, the breath knocked out of me, but I scrambled up instantly. He lashed out, a gloved hand gripping my ankle like a vice. His grip was crushing. I swung the maglite down blindly. Crack! The heavy metal torch connected with his wrist. He hissed in pain, his fingers loosening just enough for me to kick free. He's at 104, he roared, his voice sounding wet and gargled. Kill him! I scrambled to my feet and bolted. Down the hall to my left, near the elevator, I saw the other two figures. They were about 60 feet away, sprinting toward me. One of them held something long and metallic, a cattle prod or a stun baton that crackled with a menacing blue arc of electricity. I spun around and ran the opposite way, toward the far end of the facility where the north stairwell was located. My boots slammed against the concrete, my lungs burned. Behind me, I heard the heavy, repetitive thud of pursuit. They weren't yelling orders anymore, they were just running. I hit the crash bar of the stairwell door with my shoulder, bursting into the concrete echo chamber. I didn't stop to look back. I grabbed the railing and hauled myself up the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. Boom! The door below me slammed open. "Block the 3rd floor!" A voice echoed up the shaft. "Flush him to the roof!" I froze for a split second on the landing between the 1st and 2nd floors. Flush him to the roof. They were coordinating. They knew the layout better than I did. If I went to the roof, I was trapped. If I stayed on the stairs, they'd pinch me from above and below. I hit the 2nd floor landing and burst through the door into the corridor. The 2nd floor was different. It wasn't standard storage units. This floor was Climate Plus, wine storage, document archives. The corridors were narrower, lined with wire mesh cages instead of solid metal doors. It was a maze of chain-link fences. I sprinted down the main aisle, looking for a place to hide, a weapon, anything. The motion sensors clicked on ahead of me, betraying my position to anyone watching the cameras. Click, buzz. Click, buzz. I turned a corner sharply and skidded to a halt. At the end of this aisle, blocking the path to the south stairwell, stood a man. He wasn't one of the 3 from the lobby. This was a 4th man. He was leaning casually against a pillar, wearing the same dark clothes, holding a walkie-talkie. He didn't look surprised. He looked like he was waiting for a bus. "Wrong turn, Elias," he said calmly. I spun around to retreat, but footsteps thundered from the direction I had just come. I was boxed in. Panic, cold and sharp, washed over me. I looked at the wire cages around me. They were padlocked. I was in a cage match with no exit. Then I looked up. The ceiling on the 2nd floor wasn't a drop ceiling like the office. It was open industrial, with exposed pipes, ducts, and cable trays running the length of the building. And right above me, running parallel to the wire cages, was a thick, insulated HVAC duct. It was suspended by steel sorrow bars about 8 feet off the ground. The footsteps behind me were getting louder. The man with the knife pushed off the pillar, pulling a knife from his belt. It was a hunting knife, the blade 6 inches of matte black steel. I didn't have a choice. I stepped onto the bumper rail of the nearest storage cage, jumped, and grabbed the steel bracket holding the HVAC duct. The metal bit into my palms. I groaned, hauling myself up, swinging my legs over the massive silver tube. "He's climbing!" the man with the knife shouted, breaking into a run. I scrambled on top of the round duct, bouncing precariously. It was slippery with dust. I was now 10 feet in the air, sandwiched between the top of the duct and the concrete ceiling of the floor above. There was maybe 2 feet of clearance. I shimmied forward on my stomach, crawling like a worm along the top of the pipe. Below me, the man with the knife slashed at the air where my legs had been seconds ago. He looked up, his eyes visible through the slit in his mask. They were dead, flat eyes. "Get the ladder from maintenance," he barked into his radio, "and kill the power to this sector. Let's see how he likes the dark." I crawled faster, the metal vibrating under my weight. I needed to get away from the aisle. I needed to find a maintenance hatch, a vent, something that would get me off this floor before they brought the lights down. I reached a junction where the duct turned right, passing over a row of tall, solid-walled archive units. I rolled off the duct and dropped onto the roof of one of the archive units. It was a 10-foot drop onto corrugated metal. Clang! The noise was massive. I winced, rolling to absorb the impact, but pain shot up my shin. "There!" a voice yelled from the aisle I had just left. Then the world vanished. Click. The lights didn't just time out. The main breaker was thrown. The hum of the HVAC system died. The buzzing of the fluorescent bulbs ceased. Absolute, crushing darkness swallowed the facility. I lay on top of the storage unit, breathing hard, the sweat freezing on my skin. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, but I could hear them. I heard the creak of the wire cages below. I heard the soft, deliberate scuff of boots on concrete, and then I heard a sound that made my blood turn to ice water. Click. A beam of red light cut through the darkness below me, then another, then a third. Laser sights. They weren't just using flashlights anymore. They had switched to night vision. The darkness wasn't empty. It was alive with red lines. I pressed my face into the cold, corrugated metal roof of the archive unit, watching the laser sights slice through the dust-choked air below. They moved with mechanical precision, sweeping left, then right, dissecting the shadows of the aisle I had just escaped. Whir, click. The sound came from my left. I turned my head slowly, careful not to let my boots scrape against the metal. A laser beam was dancing across the wire mesh of the cage next to me. Then I heard the strain of steel. They weren't just looking, they were climbing. Someone was scaling the chain-link fence of the neighboring unit, their boots hooking into the diamond-shaped gaps of the wire. They were coming up to my level. I had seconds, maybe less. If I stayed here, pinned on top of this metal island, I was dead. I couldn't use my flashlight. I couldn't run. My only advantage was that I knew where I was, roughly. The freight elevator shaft was directly in the center of the building, about 30 feet straight ahead across a gap of open air and other storage units. I made a choice. I rose into a crouch, my knees protesting. I took a breath, judged the distance to the next block of units, a gap of about 4 feet, and leaped. For a terrifying second, I was airborne in pitch blackness. I landed hard on the next unit, my chest slamming into the metal roof. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but the sound was masked by a sudden metallic crash from behind me. "Contact above!" a voice shouted. "Sector 2B! He's rabbiting across the tops!" A red laser beam whipped up, blinding me for a split second as it swept across my eyes. I rolled to the side just as something hissed past my ear, a sound like compressed air. Phut. A small dart embedded itself in the metal right where my head had been. Tranquilizers. They wanted me alive. That somehow made it worse. I scrambled forward on my hands and knees, ignoring the pain in my shins. I reached the edge of the unit and jumped again, blindly this time. I landed awkwardly, my ankle rolling, but I kept moving. I was moving toward the center of the building, toward the elevator. "Cut him off from below! Don't let him reach the shaft!" I slid across the top of the final unit and hit the wall of the elevator shaft. It was a solid block of concrete running up through the building. I fumbled in the dark, my fingers searching for the edge. There was a maintenance ledge here, a narrow 2-foot strip of concrete that ringed the shaft. I dropped down onto it. I was now standing on a tiny ledge 30 feet above the concrete floor with my back to the elevator doors. Below me, the beams of red light were converging. I could hear heavy breathing. They were close. I turned to the elevator doors. They were heavy, painted steel. I jammed my fingers into the rubber seal between them and pulled. They didn't budge. The magnetic interlocks held them shut. "End of the line, Elias," a voice called out from the top of the unit I had just vacated. I looked up. A silhouette was crouching on the unit above me, backlit by the faint glow of a red LED on his tactical vest. He raised his weapon. Desperation is a powerful fuel. I didn't pull the doors apart. I remembered the fire code. In case of entrapment, the outer doors on older freight elevators had a mechanical release keyhole at the top. I didn't have the key, but I had the heavy ring of keys Miller had given me. I jammed the longest, weirdest-looking key, a triangular piece of metal, into the hole at the top of the frame. I twisted it with both hands, screaming with effort. Click. The mechanism disengaged. I shoved the doors open. A blast of stale, greasy air hit me in the face. The shaft yawned open, a black throat going straight down. The elevator car wasn't there. It was still on the ground floor, 3 stories down. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the greasy, oil-slicked cables that ran down the center of the shaft and swung myself out into the void. "He's in the shaft!" the man above me yelled. I slid. I didn't mean to slide that fast. The grease defeated my grip instantly. I plummeted through the darkness, the steel cables burning through the skin of my palms. I squeezed tighter, crying out as the friction tore at my hands, slowing my fall just enough to keep my legs from shattering. I passed the second floor, the first floor.
I slammed onto the roof of the elevator car. The impact rattled my teeth and sent a jolt of agony up my spine. I collapsed on top of the metal box, gasping for air, clutching my bleeding hands to my chest. I was on the ground floor. I was safe for a second. Then, I heard the mechanical whir above me. I looked up. Far above, at the fourth floor opening, a flashlight beam cut down the shaft. "Bring the car up," a voice echoed down the concrete tube. "Crush him against the ceiling." The cables in my hand vibrated. The massive motor at the top of the shaft groaned to life. The car beneath me jerked. It was starting to rise. I scrambled to the edge of the elevator car. I couldn't go up. I couldn't go back to the ground floor doors. They were locked from the outside. I looked down. There was a gap between the elevator car and the shaft wall. It was narrow, maybe 18 inches. I shone my mag light down into the crack. The shaft didn't end at the ground floor. The concrete walls continued down into darkness. And about 10 feet below the resting position of the elevator, there was another set of doors. They were painted a dull rust primer red and had no floor number painted on them. The basement. The elevator was rising faster now. If I stayed, I'd be pancaked against the top of the shaft. I squeezed myself through the gap between the car and the wall, hanging by my fingertips from the bottom edge of the elevator. My feet dangled in empty space. I let go. I fell 10 feet and hit the concrete floor of the sub-basement pit. I rolled, hitting the wall hard. Above me, the elevator car ascended, taking the noise and the light with it. I was alone in the silence again. I stood up, shaking, and turned my light toward the rust-red doors. They weren't locked. In fact, they were slightly ajar, and from the crack between them, a cold blue light was spilling out, accompanied by the low, rhythmic beeping of medical monitors.
I wedged my fingers into the gap between the rust-red doors and pulled. The metal was cold enough to burn my skin, stinging my already raw, blistered palms. With a groan of resistance, the doors slid apart on well-oiled tracks, revealing the source of the blue light. I expected a dungeon. I expected dirt floors, chains, maybe a crude furnace. What I stepped into was infinitely worse, because of how clean it was. The sub-basement wasn't a basement at all. It was a clinic. The floor was seamless white epoxy, polished to a mere shine. The walls were lined with soundproofing acoustic foam, painted a sterile, soothing gray. The air didn't smell like the rot of Unit 104. It smelled of ozone, rubbing alcohol, and the sharp metallic tang of betadine. I stepped out of the elevator pit, my boots squeaking offensively loud on the pristine floor. I killed my mag light. I didn't need it here. The hallway was bathed in the soft, ambient glow of recessed blue LED strips running along the baseboards. It felt like walking into the first-class cabin of a spaceship or a high-end server farm. But they weren't storing data down here. I walked past the first set of glass sliding doors to my left. It looked like an isolation room in an ICU. Inside, there was a single hospital bed surrounded by a bank of silent, rhythmic monitors. I pressed my face to the glass. There was a woman in the bed. She looked young, maybe 25. She was intubated, a plastic tube taped to her mouth, her chest rising and falling with the mechanical hiss of a ventilator. She was deeply unconscious, her skin pale and waxy under the lights. A thick, clear tube ran from under the sheets to a collection bag hanging off the side of the bed. I moved to the next room. A man, middle-aged, heavy-set. Same setup. Intubated, sedated, kept alive. I moved faster, panic fluttering in my throat like a trapped moth. Room after room. There were 12 of them in this corridor alone, all occupied, all silent. This was the storage Miller had talked about. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Ironclad Storage wasn't a front for a serial killer with a trophy fetish. It was a farm, a repository. They were keeping people on ice, literally and figuratively, keeping the organs fresh, the blood pumping, waiting for a buyer. I reached the end of the hall, where it opened up into a wider central station, a nurse's station essentially. There was a large desk with 3 monitors displaying vitals for every room. On the desk sat a coffee mug,
Steam was still rising from it. Someone was down here. I ducked behind the counter, my heart hammering against my ribs. I scanned the area. To my right, there was a heavy steel door labeled Processing. To my left, a corridor leading to what looked like a loading ramp, probably connecting to a hidden tunnel or a specialized garage. I crawled toward the desk, needing to find a weapon, a phone, anything. My hand brushed against a clipboard resting on the counter. I pulled it down. It was a manifest. Subject 14B, liver reserve. Match confirmed for client 892. Surgery scheduled 0400 hours. Subject 15A, corneas, kidneys, harvesting complete, disposal pending. Subject 16C, new arrival, processing incomplete, blood type O negative, high value. I looked at the time on the corner of the monitor screen, 03:42 a.m. Surgery was in 18 minutes. Check the vitals on 12, a voice said. I froze. The voice came from the processing door. It was muffled but close. Pressure's dropping, a second voice replied. This one was female, calm, professional. Adjust the drip. We can't lose the product before the courier arrives. I gripped the mag light, my knuckles white. I was trapped. The elevator was behind me, likely already bringing the kill squad down. The doctors or butchers were in front of me. I looked at the monitor closest to me. It showed a live feed of room 12. The camera zoomed in on the patient's face. I gasped, choking it back before it could escape my lips. It was Mike. The driver's license I'd found in the wallet upstairs. Michael Henderson. He wasn't dead. He was in room 12. His face was bruised, swollen, eyes taped shut, a tube down his throat. But he was alive. Subject 12. Security personnel. Unsuitable for donor market due to substance history. Slated for disposal. They were going to kill him. Not for parts, just to clean up the mess. I couldn't leave him. I didn't know this guy, but seeing him there, broken and exploited by the same monsters hunting me, sparked a rage that burned through the fear. I stood up. I wasn't going to hide under the desk. I looked at the wall behind the station. There was a fire alarm pull station. Simple, old school. If I pulled it, it wouldn't just ring here. By law, fire systems in these types of industrial zones are hardwired to the municipal grid. It would alert the fire department. It would alert the police. It would unlock the magnetic doors. But it would also tell every killer in the building exactly where I was. I reached for the lever. Whoo! The sound came from the hallway behind me, the elevator shaft. The car was coming back down. I turned just as the heavy rust-red doors at the end of the hall hissed open. 3 men stepped out. They were wearing the black tactical gear, but now they had upgraded. They had night vision goggles flipped up on their helmets, and they were carrying suppressed submachine guns. They spotted me instantly standing behind the nurse's station. Target acquired, the lead man said. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Sub-level 1, Central Station. He raised the gun. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the fire alarm lever and yanked it with everything I had. Clang, 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 clang. The alarm was deafening. Strobes flashed from the ceiling, turning the sterile white hallway into a chaotic epileptic nightmare of white light and darkness. Kill him, the leader shouted, his voice barely audible over the klaxon. I dove over the counter just as the glass partition above me shattered into 1,000 diamonds, sprayed by a burst of automatic fire.
The world dissolved into a strobing epileptic nightmare. Clang, flash, darkness. Clang, flash, darkness. The fire alarm was so loud it didn't just hurt my ears, it rattled my teeth. It was a physical pressure wave that hit me every half second, synced with the blinding white strobes that turned the sterile clinic into a disjointed stop-motion horror movie. I was curled into a ball behind the nurse's station desk, my hands clamped over my head. Above me, the air was filled with the wasp-like hiss-crack of suppressed bullets, shredding the particle board and monitors. Plastic shards and glass rained down on my back like hail. "Suppressing fire," the leader yelled, his voice cutting through the klaxon. "Alpha, flank right. Bravo, breach the counter." I scrambled on my hands and knees, my boots slipping on the polished epoxy. I couldn't stay here. If they flanked the desk, I was a dead man. I looked toward the corridor on my left, the one leading to the loading ramp. It was a straight shot, maybe 30 yards, but it was completely exposed. Then the PA system crackled to life. It wasn't the fire alarm voice. It was the calm, computerized voice of the building's AI. Code red. External link detected. Emergency services dispatched. Site compromised. Initiating purge protocol. All staff sanitize assets immediately. The shooting stopped abruptly. I risked a glance over the top of the ruined desk. The 3 men in tactical gear hadn't retreated, but they had lowered their weapons. They were looking at the processing door. The heavy steel door swung open. 2 figures stepped out. They were dressed in surgical scrubs, face masks, and plastic aprons stained with fresh, bright red blood. One was a tall, thin man. The other was the woman whose voice I'd heard earlier. They didn't look terrified. They looked annoyed. The woman was holding a tray of syringes, thick glass cylinders filled with a clear, viscous liquid. "You heard the system," she said, her voice flat and professional, shouting over the alarm. "We have 6 minutes before the fire department breaches the perimeter. No witnesses, no survivors." She turned and walked calmly toward room 12, Mike's room. "Burn the rest," the tactical leader ordered. "Thermite grenades in the records room, then get the van." My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. Purge protocol. They weren't just going to kill me, they were going to liquidate the entire inventory, every person in those beds, every witness, every scrap of paper. I watched, frozen in horror, as the woman entered room 12. Through the glass wall, I saw her approach Mike's bed. He was still unconscious, chest rising and falling. She didn't hesitate. She didn't hesitate for a second. She jammed the syringe into his IV port and depressed the plunger. I wanted to scream. I wanted to jump up and play the hero, but the 3 men with submachine guns were standing 10 feet away, pulling incendiary grenades from their vests. If I moved, I died, and Mike died anyway. Mike convulsed once, a violent arcing spasm, and then went still. The monitor line went flat. She walked out of the room, ejected the empty cartridge, and loaded a new one. She moved to the next room. It was a slaughterhouse assembly line. I looked at the loading ramp corridor again. The tactical team was busy pulling pins on the grenades. The doctors were busy killing the patients. I had one window, a tiny, vanishing window of chaos. I grabbed the heavy metal base of a shattered computer monitor from the floor. I took a breath that tasted of ozone and terror. "Hey!" I screamed, standing up. The 3 tactical guys whipped their head towards me. I hurled the monitor base with everything I had. It wasn't aimed at them, it was aimed at the ceiling, specifically at the sprinkler head directly above the thermite grenades they were holding. Crash! The heavy metal sheared the sprinkler head off. For a second, nothing happened. Then a jet of black, foul-smelling water that had been sitting in rusty pipes for decades, blasted out at high pressure. It doused the men, the floor, and the grenades in a torrent of sludge. "Contact!" the leader screamed, blinded by the black spray. I ran. I vaulted over the side of the desk and sprinted for the loading ramp corridor. My boots struggled for traction on the polished, wet floor, sending me skidding around the corner just as the bullets started flying again. Zip, 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 crack! Chunks of drywall exploded next to my head. I didn't look back. I pumped my arms, forcing my exhausted legs to piston faster. The corridor sloped upward. The air grew colder here, smelling of diesel exhaust and wet concrete. The pristine white walls of the clinic gave way to raw, unpainted cinder blocks. "He's heading for the garage. Cut him off at the blast doors." I saw the doors ahead, massive yellow and black striped steel doors, large enough for a truck. Next to them was a standard personnel door. I hit the push bar on the personnel door, praying it wasn't locked. It slammed open. I stumbled out into a cavernous underground garage. It was dimly lit by flickering sodium bulbs. Parked in the center was a large, nondescript white box truck. The back doors were open. Inside, I could see racks meant for hanging meat, but outfitted with stretchers. But between me and the exit ramp, standing by the driver's side of the truck, was the fourth man, the one from the second floor, the one with the knife. He was waiting. He had evidently taken the elevator down while I was climbing the shaft. He smiled, a cruel, jagged expression beneath his mask. He held the hunting knife in a reverse grip, the blade gleaming under the orange lights. "You're persistent, Elias," he said, stepping away from the truck to block my path to the ramp. "I'll give you that." Behind me, I heard the boots of the kill squad echoing up the corridor. I was trapped in the garage, 3 guns behind me, 1 knife in front of me, and the fire department was still 6 minutes away. I looked around frantically. To my right against the wall was a fire axe in a glass case. I didn't have time to break the glass. I looked at the man. He crouched, ready to spring. "Come here, kid. Let's make it quick." I didn't go to him. I looked at the truck. The engine was idling. The exhaust pipe was vibrating. I feinted left, toward the ramp. He shifted his weight to block me. Then I threw myself to the right, diving not for the exit, but for the open back doors of the truck. "Don't let him inside!" the leader shouted, bursting through the personnel door behind me. I hit the metal grate of the truck bed, scrambling over the blood-stained stretchers, and kicked the rear door shut from the inside, just as a hail of bullets sparked against the exterior metal. I was inside their transport, but I wasn't safe. I was just in a smaller metal box, and the man with the knife was outside, standing right next to the driver's door.
The inside of the box truck was a drum, and the bullets were the drumsticks. Ping, ping, thwack. Every round that slammed into the exterior metal sent a deafening vibration through the cargo hold, shaking the racks of blood-stained stretchers bolted to the floor. I huddled against the bulkhead separating the cargo area from the cab, my hands over my head, screaming internally. I was trapped in a coffin on wheels. Then I heard the latch. The small, sliding pass-through door behind my head rattled. Someone was trying to open it from the cab. The man with the knife. He was coming in to finish the job. I didn't wait for him to open it. I spun around on my knees, grabbed the handle on my side, and ripped the slider open myself. The man's face was right there, framed in the small square opening. He had climbed into the driver's seat. He looked surprised for a fraction of a second. He had expected a cowering victim, not someone on the offensive. I jammed my stiffened fingers straight into his eyes. He howled, jerking his head back, his hands flying up to his face. I scrambled through the opening. It was tight, a squeeze meant for paperwork, not a 6-foot man, but terror is a hell of a lubricant. I dove headfirst into the cab, my shoulders scraping raw against the metal frame. I tumbled onto the passenger seat, kicking wildly. The man was blind with pain, slashing the air with his knife. The blade bit into the upholstery, inches from my thigh. "You little rat!" he screamed, wiping tears and blood from his eyes. I didn't try to fight him. I looked at the dashboard. The keys were in the ignition. The engine was idling. I lashed out with my left boot, catching him square in the ribs. He grunted, winding him for a second. I reached over, grabbed the gear shift, and slammed it into drive. "No!" he shouted, realizing what I was doing. He lunged for the steering wheel. I stomped on the gas pedal with both feet. The truck roared. It wasn't a sports car. It was a 5-ton diesel beast. It lurched forward with a sickening grind of gears. The driver's door was still open. The acceleration threw the man backward. He flailed, grabbing at the door frame, but his grip slipped on the wet metal. He fell. I didn't look to see if he hit the ground. I felt a sickening thump crunch under the rear dual tires as the truck surged forward, but I couldn't stop to process it. "Hold fire! Aim for the tires!" a voice screamed from the rear of the garage. The back window of the cab shattered, showering my neck with safety glass. A bullet punched through the dashboard, hissing into the engine block. I gripped the wheel, ducking low. The exit ramp was 50 yards ahead, a steep concrete incline leading to a heavy rolling steel shutter. The shutter was down. I didn't touch the brakes. I floored it. The engine screamed, pushing the tachometer into the red. The truck hit the base of the ramp and groaned against gravity, picking up speed. The yellow and black stripes of the steel door rushed toward me. 30 miles per hour, 40 miles per hour. I braced myself against the dashboard, covering my face with my arms. Crash! The sound was apocalyptic. The truck hit the steel shutter like a battering ram. Metal screamed, rivets popped, and the world turned into a violent blur of tearing steel and shattering glass. The windshield imploded. For a second, I was weightless. The truck bucked, airborne as it crested the ramp and plowed through the debris of the gate. Then, gravity reclaimed us. The truck slammed down onto the asphalt of the exterior parking lot. The suspension collapsed with a bone-jarring snap. The tires blew out instantly, shredded by the twisted metal of the gate I had just destroyed. The truck skidded sideways, sparks showering the night like fireworks. It spun 180 degrees, screeching across the empty lot before slamming broadside to a concrete light pole. The impact threw me against the passenger door. My head cracked against the window frame. Darkness flickered at the edge of my vision. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears, drowning out the roar of the dying engine. I hung there for a moment, tangled in the seatbelt, gasping for air that tasted of airbag dust and copper. I was out. I was outside. I fumbled for the door handle. It was jammed. I kicked it, once, twice. It groaned open, falling off its hinges. I stumbled out onto the wet asphalt, my legs turning to jelly. I collapsed onto my hands and knees, retching. I looked back at the facility. The Ironclad Storage building loomed against the night sky, a massive, silent tomb. But from the shattered garage entrance, black smoke was starting to pour out. Thick, oily smoke. The thermite grenades. They were burning it down. Then I heard the lights. Blue and red, flashing against the low clouds. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder every second. The fire trucks, the police. I stood up, swaying, waving my arms frantically. "Here!" I croaked, my voice a broken rasp. "Over here!" A police cruiser tore into the parking lot, drifting to a stop 10 feet away. 2 officers jumped out, guns drawn, blinding me with their spotlights. "Get on the ground, show me your hands." I dropped to my knees, raising my bloodied hands. I started to laugh. It was a hysterical, broken sound bubbling up from my chest. "They're in the basement," I sobbed, collapsing onto the wet pavement as the adrenaline finally, mercifully ran out. "Check the basement."
I woke up to the sound of beeping. For a terrifying second, I thought I was back in the sub-basement, strapped to a gurney, waiting for the woman with the syringe. I thrashed, crying out, my arms tangling in the sheaths. "Easy, son. You're safe." I blinked, the harsh fluorescent light stinging my eyes. I wasn't in a clean room. I was in a standard hospital ward. A uniformed officer was sitting in a chair by the door, and a man in a cheap gray suit was standing at the foot of my bed. He looked tired. "I'm Detective Miller. No relation to your boss." "Did you find them?" I croaked. My throat felt like I had swallowed broken glass. "The basement, the truck." The detective sighed, pulling up a chair. He opened a notebook. "We found them, Elias. The fire department had arrived 4 minutes after I crashed the truck. The tactical team's thermite grenades had done their job in the records room. The paper trail was ash, but the water from the sprinkler I had sheared off in the nurse's station had flooded the hallway, preventing the fire from consuming the patient wings immediately. They found 17 people in the sub-basement. 12 were dead, executed by lethal injection in those final frantic minutes. Mike was one of them. They found him with the tape still over his eyes. But 5 were still alive. They had been prepped for surgery, but the doctors hadn't gotten to them before I triggered the alarm. I hadn't saved everyone, but I had saved 5 human beings from being parted out like stolen cars. "And the staff?" I asked, gripping the bed rail. "The woman? The guys with the guns?" The detective looked away. "We found the body of a male subject in the parking lot. Blunt force trauma, tire tracks. We identified him as a mercenary with a history in Eastern Europe. But the others, the doctors, the tactical team, they shook his head. They vanished. There was a tunnel in the garage behind a false wall. It led to the storm drains. They were gone before we even cut the locks on the front gate." That was 3 years ago. The Ironclad scandal dominated the news for months. It was the biggest story in the country. A human organ harvesting ring operating out of a storage facility in an American suburb. There were congressional hearings, manhunts, documentaries. Ironclad Storage was razed to the ground. But the story eventually faded. People moved on. The news cycle churned. I didn't move on. I live in a small town in Wyoming now. I work construction, day shifts only. I don't do night work. I don't go near storage units. I don't own a computer. The police say I'm a hero. They say my testimony helped identify 3 of the clients, billionaires who needed kidneys and livers and didn't want to wait on the UNOS list. Those guys are in prison now, or at least under house arrest in their mansions. But the network wasn't just 3 people. And the staff, the woman with the calm voice, the man who gave the orders, they are still out there. I know they are, because sometimes when the wind blows the wrong way, I can smell that specific cloying scent of bleach and old pennies. And then there was last Tuesday. I came home from work to my small cabin. I live alone. I have 3 deadbolts on the front door. I have motion sensors on every window. I checked them all. Locked. Secure. I went to the kitchen to make dinner. I opened the refrigerator. Sitting on the middle shelf, right next to the milk, was a plastic cup. It was a 7-Eleven Slurpee cup. The ice was still frozen. Condensation was dripping down the side. I hadn't bought a Slurpee. I hadn't been to a 7-Eleven in years. There was no note. There was no one in the house. The alarms hadn't triggered. The locks hadn't been picked. But someone had been inside. Someone who knew exactly how to bypass a security system. Someone who wanted me to know that they could get to me whenever they wanted. I didn't call the police. What would I say? There's a cup in my fridge? I just took the cup, poured it down the sink, and threw it in the trash. Then I sat in the middle of my living room with my shotgun across my lap, watching the sun go down, waiting for the motion lights outside to flicker on. They haven't come back yet, but I know the rule now. I learned it that night in the dark. Just because you can't see them doesn't mean you aren't being watched.